Today's daf is daf Chof Tes, and we're up to Lema Misayele. And the Gemara is going to try to support the view of Rav Yosef from the Mishnah in Masechet Makos on daf Zayin. And this all has to do with whether or not we should raise the possibility, the chashash, that even after the Gmar Din Lemisa, maybe there would be some sort of zechus that someone would come forward with an argument that would force the Beis Din to reconsider. And what do we have in the Mishnah in Makos? So we're up to Lema Misayele, which is about 4 lines down from the top, 5 lines down from the top. Kol makom sheyamdu shnayim, if 2 witnesses stand in front of a Beis Din, the Yomru, and they testify, me'idim anu es ish ploni shedigmar dino beBeis Din shel ploni. We could testify that in a different Beis Din, under a certain dayan, there was a Gmar Din lemisa. Uploni el ploni edav. We could even identify the 2 witnesses that testified in that Beis Din to Mechayev and Misa, Hareze Yehare, and we put him to death. And you see, like Rav Yosef, that we're not choshesh, we don't raise the possibility that maybe after the Gmar Din in that Beis Din, somebody came forward with a justifying argument for mitigating circumstances of a limud zchus, and they parted him up for Misa. That's not something shchiach, and we don't have to concern ourselves with that. And the Gemara answers, Dilma Boreach Shainim, that maybe the law of a Boreach is different. Once he escapes the Beis Din, he runs away as a fugitive, then we assume that for sure there was no one there to be done with l'kaf zchus. In a case where he was not a Boreach, then it could very well be, and this is an argument against Rav Yosef's position, that even after Gmar Din Lemisa, we have to be choshesh that maybe somebody would come forward and be Melamed Zchus and pater him up. Toshma. Let's say a witness testifies, says, Shama mi Beis Din shel Yisrael, shall you omrim ish ploni meis. Now, what does this mean, ish ploni meis? He heard from a certain Beis Din, and it was a Jewish court, that so-and-so died. So this is called, in the language of the Gemara in Sanhedrin Pei Aleph, Machnisen oso lekipa. People think mistakenly that there's no such thing as jail sentence in the halacha. That's not true. And the case is that a person generated a chiyuv malchus, and then he violated the same averas a second time. He got a second set of malchus for the second violation. He violated it a third time, and that's called machnisen oso lekipa. And many understood from this halach of kippah that we lock him up and we feed him sa'orim, it says, until his stomach cracks, breaks open, and he dies. That you see that even a chiyuv malchus has within it really a chiyuv misa. The Torah was lenient and let the sinner get away with malchus, but really he should die. And in this case, where he consistently, repeatedly violates the same avera over and over and over again, machnisen oso lekipa. Now, he hears from a Beis Din in this second scenario, ish ploni nerak, so-and-so is put to death. Yasius ishto. In these 2 cases, number 1, ish ploni meis, and number 2, ish ploni nerag, we will allow his wife to get married. But that's only because he heard it from a Beis Din shel Yisrael. However, if he heard from a kumat terisin, these are those who are executioners, shalom de kacham, the goyim, and they boast, oh, ish ploni meis, or ish ploni nerag. So it means that they might be saying sheker, because they want to boast, about how they put someone to death. Then al yasirus ishto. And the Gemara clarifies now, what does it mean that he heard from a Beis Din shel Yisrael that so-and-so meis? Umay, and what does it mean that he heard from a Beis Din that so-and-so nerag was put to death? If If he really heard from a Bezdin that so-and-so is gone, in other words, they killed him, they buried him, then the Kavase Gabeovi Kochavim, if a guy tells you about a certain Jew that he was put to death or he died, is Amai, why do you say Al Yasiu as Ishto? HaKaimelon, we have a principle in Yevamis, Daf Kuf Chav Aleph, and other Masechtas that call a Mesech Lefi Tumo, is Hemunei Mehemni Le. If a guy tells you a story, Bitom Lev, in other words, he didn't have kavanah to testify, then the Chachamim believe him. El Alav, therefore, by process of elimination, what does it mean that he heard that so-and-so died? Mace means Yotze Lamos, that he's being taken out after the Gzmar Din to be put to death. V'nerag, what does nerag mean? Yotze Lihareg. So Uktani, and yet it says, B'besin Shel Yisrael Yasius Ishta. This is a clear-cut proof to support Rav Yosef's position that if a person is a Yotze Lihareg and a Besin Shel Yisrael, then we're not choshesh that he's still alive. He's considered a vaday mess, and therefore we can marry off his wife. So why is it that you should impose upon such a person or his wife, his daughter, and so forth and so on, chumrei chayim? There's no chumrei chayim here. He's a definite certain goner. Gemara rejects this proof. Li olam meis mamish v'nereg mamish. And now we have a problem, because if there's testimony that so-and-so died in the kippah, or so-and-so was put to death by Bezdin, then the kavasi gabayovit kachom lo. Your question was, why can't we marry off? Why can't we rely on the Ovi Kachavim? We rely on a guy who's not interested in testifying. He's just telling a story. The more answers, Hani Mili. When do we have a reliable Mesiach Lefi Tumon in case of a guy? That's only b'milsilo shaychebe. That's only in something where he has no vested interest, the guy, to lie. He's just telling you a story. Aval milsa the shaychebe, when he's has a vested interest to lie. For example, he's boasting about the fact that he put someone to death. Then we don't even believe his story. And avdilach zuke shekrayu, and therefore he's sheker. Therefore, even in a case of so-called Mesiach Lefi Tuma, we cannot rely on it because we know he's a no good liar. And that gives us the Mishnah here on Daf Chav Tes Amnam. Now we're going to have two Mishnayos, one after the other, that address the issue of a shliach who cannot fulfill his shlichus and deliver the get to the Mishaleach's wife. Hamevi get be Eretz Yisrael. So there's no need for the get, for the shliach to recite and declare b'fanei nechtam. Now he took ill, he's in bed, he's in a hospital, he cannot deliver the get. Is he allowed to take that get, hand it over to another shliach, and appoint a second shliach? He doesn't have to go into a bezdin and make sure that bezdin will hear his testimony and appoint a second string mishaleach, but rather he himself could simply hand over the get to another shliach. Omar lo, but if the Baal said, "Toli heimenu chefetz ploni," I want you to do a swap. Give the get to my wife, but only conditionally on her returning to me some sort of an object. Let's say, for example, he gave her a very fancy piece of pottery and he wants it back. So don't fulfill the shlichus until you get back the return of that pottery. Lo yishalchenu b'yadacher she'ein ritzono she'piktono b'yadacher. He trusts this shliach and only the shliach. And even though the shliach wants to bring a second string shliach in his place and hand over the get to the second shliach, but nevertheless, the Baal has indicated by saying the words totally, I want you to take back this object. I don't trust anyone to guard the object. And that means that he has a kapeda that only this shliach should serve as the shliach. And in such a case, the Mishnah says the first shliach cannot appoint a second shliach. The Gemara now quotes Rav Kahana. So we said that if the shliach brings the get from Eretz Yisrael and he takes ill, he's allowed to appoint a second shliach and pass on the get to shliach number 2. Rav Kahana. Rav Kahana says that this is not an absolute rule, that under all circumstances, the first shliach can take advantage of his rights to appoint a second shliach. But chalatanan, it's only in a case where he's honest. And because of the circumstances in which he's laid up in a hospital room and he has no way of fulfilling the shlichus, we made an exception and we apply the leniency that now he can hand over the shlichus to a second shliach. But if he's not a chola and he just, for whatever reason, he wants to check out and take care of other things and he wants to give over the get to a second shliach, that he cannot do. So Gemara says, Pshita cholat ktani. What's the chiddush, the great novel insight of Rav Kahana, when the Mishnah itself says that because he took ill, so the Gemara answers, Mal detema hu adin afal gav delochal. A shliach, by definition, could appoint a second shliach under all circumstances, no conditions attached. V'hai diktani, why does the Mishnah formulate in terms of chola urcha devilsa ktani? As a general rule, a shliach is neman. He really is dedicated to fulfill his shlichus. He would not pass the buck to someone else, or in this case, pass the get to someone else, but he took ill. So the general case in which a shliach appoints a second shliach is a case of chola kamash malon. Rav Kahana wants to tell you that don't think that the Mishnah is just giving you a urcha de milsa, but rather the Mishnah is bedafka, and only in a case of anus, only in a case of chola, then and only then is he allowed to pass on the get to someone else and appoint a second shliach. So the Gemara says he done it. Under what circumstances does the shliach have the right to appoint a second shliach, but only again if he was chola? If all the Baal said when he appointed the shliach was holech, he didn't say at holech, ata holech. He didn't say that you have to bring the get. He just said holech. Holech means make sure that the wife gets the get. So why do you add, Rav Kahana, this condition that he's got to be a chola? Is afagav delo chola nami, even if the shliach is not in an honest situation, he didn't take ill, but the Baal was saying holech. Holech means make sure that she receives the get. It's almost like halacha in the chefta that the get as a chefta should be delivered to her, but not the maisa halich. But the Omar, what's the other option? Amalei at holech. You bring the get. And by adding the word you, then he has specified that I want you and only you. You're exclusive my shliach. Is that afilu chola namilo? Even if he took ill, he should not be able to violate the kapeda, the Baal, and set up a second shliach. So we're really in a mimanavshach. This distinction that Rav Kahana is making that, we'll allow the shliach to appoint another shliach if the first shliach took ill. We don't know what scenario that would apply to because mimanavshach. Either the Baal said ata, and therefore if he said ata, even in a choli, is a kapeda the Baal, and he can't give over the shliach. If on the other hand he said holech, then even if he's not a chola, he should be able to pass on the shlichus. And if you'll tell me that our Mishnah, according to Rav Kahana, reflects the shita of Shimon Gamliel, which we'll see immediately in the Brisa, is then Rav Shimon Gamliel is of the opinion that even in the case of holech, he cannot pass on the shlichus afilu chola nami lo. And once again, according to Rav Shimon Gamliel, we cannot make a distinction and allow the leniency of appointing a second shliach in the case of chola. This sign because we learned in a brisa holech gets ishti. He did not add the word ata. Hareza mishalcha according to Tanakam b'yad acher, and apparently that would apply even if he's not a chola, because the brisa gives you stama. It says hareza mishalcha b'yad acher. It doesn't say because of chola he's allowed to mishableach b'yad acher. However, says the Brisa, if he says ata holech get zel ishti, harezi lo shalchenu biad acher, and the Brisa doesn't tell you, well, if he's a chola, he's allowed to send the biad acher. So again, at this point in the Tanakama, we're in a mimanavshach state, because either it's a case of holech without viata, and then It doesn't matter whether he's a chol or not. He could appoint a second shliach, or it's a case of ata, and then even if he's a chol, he cannot appoint a second shliach. Rav Shimon Gamliel Omer Benkachu Benkach, whether he said holech or he said ata holech, ein hashaliach ose shliach. He cannot set up a second shliach, and it seems to imply even in a case of chol. So that according to Rav Shimon Gamliel, the implication of holech is ata holech. And now the Gemara is going to try to explain Rav Kahana's stipulation of choleh in three different approaches. Ibais Ema, one answer that I could give you in explaining the Mishnah and the condition of choleh is holech. We're talking about a case of holech. And even though he left out the word ata, and even if we don't introduce Rav Shimon Gamliel, let's go with the Tanakama, nevertheless, Rav Kahana's interpretation of the Mishnah is Vahu Dechola. Why? Because apparently the word holech indicates that if all things are ideal, you're the one to bring the get. You're my shliach. I don't want you to hand it over. But the main purpose is guarantee me that she will receive the get, and that's called holech. And therefore, in a case of a chola, he's allowed to appoint a second shliach. A second way of interpreting the Mishnah in the light of Rav Kahana is ata holech. We're talking about a case of ata. And we assumed that in the case of ata, that's how we interpreted the Tanakama, the Brisa. There's no way, no how, even in the case of chola, that he could appoint a second shliach. No, chola shiny. Even though he said ata, he was only indicating that ideally, if you're well and healthy, you deliver the get. And I will not tolerate that you give the get to someone else. But in event that you cannot give the get, then appoint a shliach. And a third answer is, you know what? Rav Shimon Gamliel. We assume that according to Rav Shimon Gamliel, whether it's a case of a holech or a case of ata holech, in both cases, there's an absolute rule, ironclad with no exception, that ain't shliach osa shliach. No, chola shiny. Even according to Rav Shimon Gamliel, the din of a chola is different. And Rav Shimon Gamliel will be modeh that in the case of holech, which according to Rav Shimon Gamliel means basically ata holech, and even in the case of ata holech, if he becomes ill and he cannot fulfill his shlichus, he's an onus, he can appoint a second. So we have three ways of interpreting the Mishnah according to Rav Kahana. Now the Gemara raises a kasha from the next Mishnah. Tanan, Hamevi get the Eretz Yisrael. And in Eretz Yisrael, you don't have to say b'fanei v'chol. And now the shliach took ill, and he cannot fulfill his shlichus and complete it by delivering the get. He can appoint another shliach. But I'll ask you a kasha from a Mishnah later on. And this Mishnah later on is on Daf Samach Vav. If the Baal says, Amar l'shnayim tnu get li ishti, he appoints two people that they should what? Well, what are they doing? After all, if it's a shliach, it doesn't make sense to say tnu get li ishti and l'shnayim. It should have been to one. The answer is that he was appointing these two as Eden. And what does that mean? He didn't tell them to write the get, but af shelo amar lehem atem atzmechem kisvuhu, they have to write the get. Oh, here's another scenario, l'shlosha. In the case of shlosha, he said to them, kisvu get utnu leishti, which means that one of the three of them will what? Will write the get, and the other two will sign the get as Eden. It's Arelu Yichtaru. Right? They will make sure the get is written and they will sign the get, and they will deliver the get. So the Gemara is Mitayek. Let me just shut off this thing because it's bothering me. Inu in, Shaliach lo. Darn. I don't know how to stop this beeping. I tried everything.
What's beeping?
I assume it's the oven. I don't know, but I tried pressing every single button there. Okay, let's see if we can get back on track if I didn't lose my train of thought here. Yeah, in, right? They can write the get and deliver the get. Avol shliach lo. But a shliach to write the get, the emphasis here is on writing the get and then delivering the get. They can't do. They can't set up someone else to write the get. And we're going to have machlokas abai v'rava as to why that is so. So now we have a stira. On the one hand, we have our Mishnah that says, maybe get married to Sovachala Mashalcho bi'aracha. But on the other hand, in the Mishnah later on, it seems to indicate that under no circumstances can he set up another shliach to write and deliver the get. Omer Abaye Hasam Taimamai Mishum Bizayin Deba. In that Mishnah later on, there's a distinct reason why he cannot set up another shliach. The get has to be written by a Baal. It says v'kosav v'nosam. And it's pretty embarrassing for the Baal that he doesn't have the capacity of writing a get. He's simply illiterate. So he wants to keep that on a hush-hush. He doesn't want to get other people involved in knowing that he was incapable of writing the get. So this shliach is going to say to another shliach, you write the get. But Hacha in our Mishnah, where the Baal gave the get to a shliach, Baal lo kapid, right? The shliach is like public knowledge, and the shliach will deliver the get, and there's no bizayin here. And therefore, if he involves another shliach, since it's already like public knowledge, and the Baal was not makpid, then he can appoint another shliach. So that's Abai. So Abai understands that the blockage to appoint another shliach is based on the bizayin de Baal. Rav Omar, there's a much more fundamental reason that blocks the ability of the first shliach to appoint a second, and that is called mili. Rav Omar mishum de mili ninu, mili lo memser in l'shliach. If the Baal had a get written and then he gives the get over to a shliach, the shliach can appoint a second shliach because he has now a chefta of a get in his hand, and by passing on that get to another shliach, he could appoint another shliach. But if the get has not been written, and the Baal is appointing a shliach to write the get, so in such a case, if the shliach wants to now give it over to another shliach to write the get, that's called mili. That's just words. My beinayu, what's the nafkamina between Abaye and Rava? Ika beinayu shliach matana. Now, in the case of shliach matana, there's no busha element, and therefore Abaye's principle of ein shliach osa shliach would not apply. However, if we apply the fundamental principle of Rava of mili, then in the case of a shtar matana, we have a problem of mili. Right? Because now it's only dibur, and he's not giving anything over to the second shliach, and therefore he's not able to give over his shlichus to someone else. Just 1 second. The thought occurred to me that just 1 second. Why is that called mili? He's holding on to the shtar matana. Oh, I'm sorry. He was sent as a shliach to write a shtar matana. Okay. This machlokas between Abai and Rava is identical to the machlokas between Rav and Shmuel about a shliach matana. Can a shliach matana, who is appointed to write a shtar matana, appoint a second shliach? Rav Omer matana eina ki get. In other words, even though in the case of a get, the Baal is embarrassed by the fact that he can't write the get. He doesn't want public knowledge that, that the first shliach tells another shliach, and everybody knows that the Baal couldn't write the get. But in the case of matana, there's no embarrassment, and therefore the shliach can make another shliach. So Rav is like the shita of Abai. Shmuel Amar Matana Rei he could get. And just like in the case of a get, you can't make a second shliach because of the problem of mili. That same problem exists with regard to a shtar matana, and therefore Rava is standing on the shoulders of Shmuel. The Mishnah says, "Imamalo tol heimenu chayfetz ploni." He has a right to say, "Ein ritzoni shepiktoni bi'adachim Reish Lakish kan shana Rebbe." Here's where Rebbe taught us in this context that ein hashoel rashoy la'ashil. Charney? Char? Rabbi, do you hear this beeping that noise? Oh, you didn't even hear it. Okay, so you know what? I'll make believe that I don't hear it either. Like, let's say, for example, I rent skates. I'm going ice skating. Am I allowed to give you those skates and you become the renter in place of me? Or let's say I borrow an animal to plow the field. Can I give over the animal to you to plow the field? And the answer is no, because I trust you to guard and protect the animal or the object, the ice skates. I don't trust anybody else. We have an agreement. Charlie, it's driving me nuts.
I didn't know that it was beeping again.
Yeah.
Sorry.
I can't concentrate.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, it's all right. Omalo Rabbi Yochanan says to Reish Lakish, you have to tell me that Rebbe had to be medayik in our Mishnah and teach us this halacha. Of course, if you're the shoel, you can't give it over to anyone else. If you're the socher, you can't give it over to someone else. Ella, rather, what was Rebbe teaching me here? He wants to teach me the zimna the gita nami lo havi, even in the case of a get under certain situations. Lo yachol, the get will not be chal. Denasa kimisha amal al tegarsha el bebayis v'gersha b'aliyah al tegarsha el b'yamin v'gersha b'smol. What Rebbe is teaching me here is halacha called shinui b'shlichus. Kol ha'meshana mishlichus is the shlichus is bata. And therefore, for example, if the Baal tells the shliach, do you know what? I want you to give the get in the house, on the bottom floor of the house. And the shliach went ahead on his own and he decided he's going to climb up to the roof or in the attic and he's going to give the get there. Or the Baal says to the Isha, I want you to give it with your right hand. And he goes in and gives it with the left hand. It's not a get. The shlichus is bata. And the same thing, says Rebbe, applies if he says to the shliach, take back the object and then give the get. Gemara says the following. From the fact that Rabbi Yochanan said that zimnin de gita nami lo havi, it implies that even Rabbi Yochanan would be modeh, that in general, in most cases, then the shliach could send a get to someone else. It's only these very exceptional cases where he says, take it back. The Kuli Alma, whether it's Rabbi Yochanan or Reish Lakish, everybody agrees that if the woman goes out to the second shliach and immediately, even before she receives the get, she gives the chayfetz that she owes the Baal to the shliach, then for Hada Shaklam in a Gita, and then afterwards she gets the get, Kuliyamala Pli the Gita Maliyahav. After all, the Baal's Kpeda is that he wants to get back his object. And he wants to guarantee that he'll get back the object by making sure that she doesn't receive the get until the object is given. And now she gave it over to the Shliach Sheni. And even though the Shliach Rishon, by the way, violated the Ratzon of the Baal, because Ein Ritzoni Shei Piktor B'Yadachon, he appointed the second Shliach, but nevertheless, it doesn't matter. Why? Because a Shliach HaGet is allowed to give the get to someone else and get back the Chayfetz. And here, he got back the Chayfetz because she met the Shliach and gave back the Chayfetz. Keep pligi. So where's the nafkamina between Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish? Hecha di Omar le. Right? The Baal said to the Shliach,